On the sweltering night of August 11th, 1989, 10 men were systematically hunted and eliminated across West Baltimore over a span of 72 hours. All shot, all between the ages of 19 and 31, all members of the same drug crew. The perpetrators weren't rival dealers or federal agents. They were 4 members of the Bishop family. Thomas Bishop, a decorated Vietnam Marine veteran, and his 3 sons, moving through row house corridors and corner markets like a tactical unit clearing hostile territory. The Baltimore Police Department would later call it the most disciplined civilian manhunt in the city's history. But the motive wasn't drugs, wasn't territory, wasn't even money. It was a Purple Heart medal stolen during a home invasion, a piece of metal with no street value, worth maybe $50 to a pawn shop, but worth everything to a 47-year-old father who'd bled for it in Da Nang in 1968. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. West Baltimore in August of 1989 was a war zone dressed up as a neighborhood. The crack epidemic had hit the city like a natural disaster, transforming entire blocks from working-class communities into open-air drug markets. The temperature that August pushed 94 degrees during the day, humidity at 98%, the kind of oppressive heat that made the asphalt soft underfoot and turned every breath into work. At night, it dropped to the low 80s, but the heat stayed trapped in the row houses, brick and concrete holding the day's warmth like a furnace that never quite cooled. The smell of West Baltimore in 1989 was unmistakable, a mixture of fried fish from corner carryouts, garbage rotting in alleys where collection had become sporadic, and underneath it all, the sweet chemical smell of crack being cooked in apartments and abandoned houses. You could hear it too, if you paid attention. Bass from car stereos, always bass, rattling windows at 2 a.m. Sirens, constant sirens, sometimes so frequent they became white noise. The pop of firecrackers that might not be firecrackers. Voices raised in argument that might turn into something worse. The block where Thomas Bishop lived, the 2300 block of Pennsylvania Avenue, sat right on the fault line between 2 worlds. Half the houses were still occupied by families who'd lived there for decades. Postal workers, hospital orderlies, bus drivers, people who went to work every morning and tried to maintain some dignity. The other half had surrendered to the inevitable. Boarded windows, collapsed porches, yards returning to weeds, and on the corners, young men in starter jackets and fresh Nikes conducting business with the efficiency of any franchise operation. Thomas Anthony Bishop was 47 years old that August, though the streets and the war had aged him beyond his years. He stood 6'1", lean and hard from decades of physical discipline, with the kind of posture that came from Marine Corps training and never left. His hair had gone completely gray, kept in a tight fade that he cut himself every Sunday morning. His hands were scarred, one long scar across his left palm from a punji stick in Vietnam, smaller scars on his knuckles from fights in his younger days, calluses from his current work doing maintenance at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Every morning, Thomas woke at 0530 hours. 20 years out of the Corps, he still thought in military time. Made coffee in a percolator his wife had bought at Hecht's department store in 1972, back when the downtown still had department stores worth visiting. Sat at his kitchen table smoking one Camel cigarette, no filter, while reading The Baltimore Sun. Then he'd wake his 3 sons for whatever work or school they had that day. Thomas had married Diane Louise Washington in 1966, right after his first tour. They'd had 3 sons, Marcus Anthony, born in 1967, while Thomas was deployed. Raymond Thomas, born in 1969 between tours. Christopher James, born in 1971, after Thomas had finally come home for good. Diane had been the anchor that kept Thomas steady through his nightmares, through his readjustment to civilian life, through 20 years of trying to build something solid in a city that seemed determined to tear itself apart. Then, in February of 1987, Diane started complaining about headaches. By April, they had a diagnosis: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. She died on July 15, 1987, at Johns Hopkins Hospital, holding Thomas's hand while their 3 sons stood around the bed crying. Thomas buried her at Loudon Park Cemetery on a Thursday afternoon, so hot the funeral director offered to reschedule. He declined. Marines don't reschedule. What Thomas valued most wasn't the house or the car or even his own life. What he valued was the idea that a man could serve his country honorably, raise his sons right, keep them away from the poison on the corners, and build something that would outlast him. In 1989, that idea was barely surviving. The Purple Heart sat in a shadow box on Thomas's living room wall. Next to it, his bronze star with valor. Next to that, a photograph of his platoon in Da Nang, 1968. 18 men who looked impossibly young, half of them dead within 6 months of that photo being taken. Thomas had earned the Purple Heart on March 23, 1968, during the Tet Offensive. His squad had been pinned down in a village 10 clicks outside Da Nang, mortar fire coming from 3 directions. A piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter had hit Thomas in the left shoulder, missing his subclavian artery by maybe an inch. He'd kept fighting for another 4 hours, calling in coordinates for artillery support, dragging 2 wounded Marines to the evac zone, refusing morphine until everyone else was loaded on the Huey. The medal wasn't about glory, it was about blood. His blood spilled in service to something larger than himself. It was proof that Thomas Bishop had stood his ground when it mattered, that he'd done his duty when others would have broken. His 3 sons had grown up understanding that the medals on the wall represented more than just military service. They represented the code Thomas lived by: discipline, honor, protecting what was yours, never backing down. Marcus, the oldest at 22, worked at the Port of Baltimore as a longshoreman, union job with good benefits, the kind of work that could support a family. Raymond, 20, had just finished his 2nd year at Morgan State University studying criminal justice, wanted to be a police officer. Christopher, 18, had graduated from Digital Harbor High School in June and was trying to figure out what came next: college, military, work, something that would get him off the block and into a future. All 3 boys were clean. In a neighborhood where teenagers were running crack for dealers who drove better cars than doctors, where 14-year-olds carried pistols like cell phones, Thomas had somehow kept his sons away from the trade. That took work, that took constant vigilance, that took respect. The neighborhood knew Thomas Bishop, knew he was a veteran, knew he'd done 2 tours in Vietnam, knew he'd worked the same maintenance job at Hopkins for 15 years, knew he was raising 3 sons alone after cancer took his wife, knew he was struggling but handling it with the kind of quiet dignity that earned respect even in a city where respect usually came from fear. That respect was everything to Thomas. It was the invisible barrier that kept the dealers from recruiting his sons, that kept the corner boys from testing him, that allowed him to live on a block controlled by the drug trade without being part of it. The West Side Crew wasn't a gang in the traditional sense. No colors, no hand signs, no elaborate hierarchy. Just a collection of young men, mostly late teens and 20s, who'd claimed several blocks around Pennsylvania Avenue and Fulton Street as their territory for selling crack. Maybe 30 guys working at various levels: lookouts, runners, corner boys, enforcers. The real money went to people nobody on the street ever saw. Suppliers who lived in the suburbs and drove into the city once a week to collect. What remained on the corners was just enough to make young men who had no other options think they were making it. Raymond Ray Ray Foster was the crew's shot caller in the summer of 1989. 26 years old, originally from the Poe Homes projects before they started getting demolished. He'd grown up hard. Father killed in a shootout with police when Ray Ray was 8. Mother worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep food on the table consistently. Ray Ray was tall, 6'3", basketball player build, had actually been recruited by Coppin State until a torn ACL junior year ended that dream. Now he ran 4 corners, had maybe 15 guys working under him, moved enough product to drive a 1987 BMW 325i and wear enough gold to make his neck hurt. Among Ray Ray's crew were several young men who'd become central to what happened next. Kevin K-Dog Thompson, 24, his main enforcer, solid, reliable, had done a year in Jessup for assault before finding the drug trade more profitable and less dangerous than stick-up work. Darnell Mitchell, 22, who handled the money and had dreams of saving enough to open a legitimate barber shop. Antoine Harris, 19, Ray Ray's younger cousin, who was supposed to be in his 2nd year at Baltimore City Community College but kept missing classes to run packages. These weren't hardened criminals in the traditional sense. Most of them, like Ray Ray, were young men who'd grown up watching their neighborhoods collapse, watching their fathers lose factory jobs that never came back, watching their mothers work themselves into early graves for poverty wages. The crack trade hadn't created West Baltimore's problems. It had simply filled the vacuum that economic collapse had created. For 2 years, Thomas Bishop and the West Side crew had coexisted on the same blocks without significant conflict. Thomas knew who they were, what they did. He'd nod to Ray Ray when they passed on the street. The dealers knew better than to conduct business directly in front of Thomas's house, knew better than to disrespect a Marine vet who'd served his country. It was the kind of uncomfortable détente that allowed neighborhoods to function when law enforcement had essentially surrendered entire zip codes to the drug trade. That fragile peace died on the night of August 10th, 1989, a Thursday. The temperature had finally dropped to 80 degrees by 9 p.m., though the humidity made it feel hotter. Thomas was at work. He'd picked up a double shift to help Marcus save money for a car. His 3 sons were home, Marcus in his room listening to music, Raymond studying for a criminal justice exam, Christopher watching television in the living room. The house was a narrow row house, typical West Baltimore construction, 2 stories, maybe 14 feet wide, shared walls with the houses on either side. Front door opened directly to the living room, stairs going up to 3 small bedrooms, kitchen in the back, small yard enclosed by a chain-link fence. At 9:47 p.m., according to the police report filed 3 days later, 4 members of the West Side crew kicked in the front door of 2347 Pennsylvania Avenue. They wore bandanas over their faces, but Christopher recognized them anyway. You don't live on the same block as people for years without knowing how they move, how they sound. They were looking for money. In the twisted logic of street crime, they'd somehow convinced themselves that Thomas Bishop, a 47-year-old maintenance worker living in a row house worth maybe $30,000, had cash hidden somewhere. Maybe because he was a veteran, maybe because his sons stayed clean, maybe because they'd seen Marcus get paid from the port and invented a fantasy about stacks of hundreds hidden in the walls. They found nothing. Maybe $200 in Marcus's room from his last paycheck, a jar of quarters in the kitchen Thomas kept for laundry, Raymond's student ID, and $40 in his wallet. The robbery took 7 minutes. When they were done, when they'd torn through every drawer and closet and found nothing worth the risk they'd taken, they trashed the place, kicked holes in walls, overturned furniture, broke the television, tore down the photographs on the mantel, Thomas and Diane's wedding photo, the boys' school pictures, everything. And in a final gesture of contempt, one of them, Christopher was pretty sure it was Antoine Harris, grabbed the shadow box off the living room wall and took the medals, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the photograph of Thomas's platoon. Gone. "This shit ain't worth nothing anyway," Christopher heard one of them say as they left. "But we'll wear 'em around the block. Let people know we run this shit." The door hung broken on its hinges. The house was destroyed. And the only things of value Thomas Bishop owned, the only physical proof that he'd served honorably, that he'd bled for something larger than himself, were now trophies for drug dealers who wouldn't live to see 30. Marcus called 911. The police arrived 47 minutes later. Two uniforms who looked at the damage, looked at the location, and made quick calculations about how much effort they'd put into this. They took a report, gave the family a case number, said they'd look into it. Everyone in that room knew they wouldn't. This was West Baltimore in 1989. Police were overwhelmed, undermanned, increasingly unwilling to risk their lives for property crimes in neighborhoods they had essentially written off. Christopher told them who did it, gave them names, described the bandanas, the voices, the specific threats. The officers wrote it down but didn't promise anything beyond, "We'll investigate." They left at 11:34 p.m., and Christopher sat in the wreckage of his living room, waiting for his father to come home, knowing that when Thomas Bishop walked through that broken door and saw what had been taken, something terrible was going to happen. Thomas arrived home at 11:52 p.m. His double shift had finally ended. He was tired, looking forward to maybe one beer and some sleep before another day started. He saw the broken door from the curb, saw the light on inside, saw his 3 sons sitting in the living room, surrounded by overturned furniture and broken glass. He walked through that door and took in the damage with the same systematic assessment he'd used clearing villages in Vietnam. Methodical, complete, missing nothing. "Anyone hurt?" His voice was calm. "No, sir," Marcus said. "They came in looking for money. Didn't find nothing worth taking, so they—" Thomas had spotted the empty space on the wall where the shadow box used to hang. He walked over slowly, touched the spot where the Purple Heart had been. The outline was still visible in the faded paint, a rectangle of darker color, where the box had protected the wall from 20 years of sunlight and cigarette smoke. "The medals," Thomas said. Not a question. "They took them," Christopher said quietly. "Antoine Harris grabbed the whole box, said they were going to wear them around the neighborhood." For a long moment, Thomas just stood there, hand on the wall, looking at the empty space. His sons watched him, saw something happening behind their father's eyes. Some calculation being made, some decision forming. Finally, Thomas turned around, looked at his 3 sons sitting in the wreckage of their home. "Kitchen table," he said. 5 minutes, all of you." At the kitchen table, the same table where Diane had served thousands of meals, where the boys had done their homework, where Thomas had taught them to tie their shoes, and later, to be men. Thomas Bishop laid out what was going to happen next. His voice was calm, almost gentle, like he was explaining how to change a tire or balance a checkbook. "They took something that doesn't belong to them, something I earned with my blood in Vietnam, something that represents every Marine who didn't come home, every brother I lost, every goddamn thing I gave to this country." "Dad," Marcus started, "I'm not finished." Thomas's voice didn't rise, but Marcus went silent. "The police aren't going to do anything. You know it. I know it. We called them. They took a report, and that's the last we'll hear about it. There's no legal remedy for this, no court that's going to make it right." Raymond, the criminal justice student, tried reason. "Dad, if we know who did it, we can press charges. Christopher can identify them. We can what?" Thomas looked at his middle son. "File charges that will take 8 months to process. Hope the state's attorney actually prosecutes. Watch them get probation because they're juveniles or first-time offenders or Because the system is so overwhelmed it doesn't have time for property crime? No. He shook his head. No, that's not how this works. Then what are you saying? Christopher asked, though he already knew. I'm saying we handle it ourselves, military style. We identify every person who was involved. We track them down. We get my medals back. And we make sure nobody ever thinks they can violate this family again. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus looked at his brothers, then back at his father. You're talking about going after the West Side crew. Dad, there's 30 of them. We're not going after 30 people. We're going after the 4 who came through that door, plus anyone who knows where my medals are. 10 people, maximum. We identify them, we locate them, and we eliminate the threat. Thomas used the phrase deliberately, eliminate the threat, military terminology for killing the enemy. Christopher, the youngest, spoke up. Dad, eliminate means, I know what it means, son. Thomas looked at each of his boys in turn. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam doing exactly this kind of operation. Search and destroy. You identify the enemy. You plan your approach. You execute with precision. I can teach you everything you need to know. This is murder, Raymond said flatly. What you're describing is premeditated murder. What I'm describing is justice when the system offers none. Thomas stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the block where dealers sold poison, and everyone just accepted it as normal. Your mother made me promise to keep you boys safe, to raise you right, to build something that would last. But if I let this stand, what am I teaching you? That a man can have his home violated, his property stolen, his honor disrespected, and he does nothing? That we're victims? That we're weak? None of them answered. No, Thomas continued. I'm teaching you that a bishop protects what's his, that we don't rely on systems that don't work, that when someone crosses certain lines there are consequences, real consequences. Marcus was the first to speak. He was 22, worked hard, tried to stay out of trouble, but he'd also grown up watching his father carry himself with a dignity that came from knowing he'd served honorably, and now he'd watched these dealers take the proof of that service like it was nothing. What do you need us to do, Dad? Thomas turned from the window. First, we gather intelligence. I need to know where these people stay, what their routines are, who they associate with. We watch, we learn, we plan. Then we execute. When? Christopher asked. 72 hours. We have maybe 3 days before they get comfortable, before they start showing off those medals to people. After that, the medals get lost or pawned or thrown away. We move fast, we move smart, and we finish it before anyone knows what's happening. Raymond tried one more time. Dad, this is going to destroy our family. You understand that. If we do this, there's no coming back. We'll spend the rest of our lives in prison. Everything Mom wanted for us. Your mother wanted you to be men. Thomas's voice finally showed emotion. She wanted you to understand that some things are worth fighting for, that honor matters, that family matters. Yes, there will be consequences, but there are also consequences to doing nothing, to letting people spit on everything your father stood for. They sat at that kitchen table until 2 a.m., talking through the reality of what Thomas was proposing. All 3 sons objected at various points. All 3 looked for alternatives, but they also understood what their father understood. In West Baltimore in 1989, when the police wouldn't help and the courts wouldn't deliver justice, you either protected yourself or you became prey. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus was the first to commit. I'm with you, Dad, all the way. Christopher nodded. Me too. Raymond, the one who wanted to be a police officer, who believed in law and order and proper channels, held out the longest. But finally, at 2:33 a.m., he looked at his father and said, We're family. We do this together. Thomas Bishop stood up, looked at his 3 sons. young men he'd raised to believe in right and wrong, in law and justice, in building something through honest work. And now he was teaching them a different lesson, that sometimes the law fails, sometimes justice requires blood, sometimes protecting what's yours means crossing lines that can never be uncrossed. "Get some sleep," Thomas said. "Tomorrow we start planning, and boys—" He paused. "I'm proud of you, all of you. Your mother would be too." Whether Diane Bishop would have been proud of what came next, nobody could say. But as her three sons headed upstairs to try to sleep before the storm they were about to unleash, Thomas sat alone at the kitchen table, smoking cigarettes and making lists. Names, addresses, patterns of movement. The tactical planning he'd learned at Paris Island in 1965, refined in the jungles of Vietnam, now being applied to the streets of West Baltimore. 10 names, 72 hours, one man's determination to prove that some disrespect comes with a price that can't be paid in money or jail time. Only in blood. What Thomas Bishop didn't know, sitting at that kitchen table with a spiral notebook and a service pistol he'd kept hidden for 20 years, was that his decision would leave 10 young men dead, his family destroyed, and West Baltimore marked forever by 3 nights when a veteran's honor collided with street justice in the most unforgiving summer the city had ever known. Friday, August 11th, 1989, 05:47 hours. Thomas Bishop sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a street map of West Baltimore spread in front of him. The map was from 1985, outdated, but the streets hadn't changed, just the people living on them. His notebook lay open beside the map, 10 names written in careful block letters. Raymond Ray Foster, 26, shot caller, lives with girlfriend on Fulton Street. Kevin K-Dog Thompson, 24, enforcer, stays in mother's row house on Stricker Street. Antoine Harris, 19, runner, Ray's cousin, shares apartment on Lexington. Darnell Mitchell, 22, money handler, rents room on Monroe Street. Deshaun Wallace, 21, corner boy, mother's house on Carey Street. Malik Johnson, 23, lookout, moves between locations, hard to pin down. Terrell T. Money Brown, 20, runner, lives with grandmother on Prestman. Brandon Lewis, 19, new recruit, still lives at home on Pennsylvania, 4 blocks from Thomas's house. Jamal Robinson, 25, enforcer, has apartment on North Avenue. Curtis Green, 22, lookout, stays with sister on Pulaski Street. Marcus came downstairs at 06:15, found his father marking locations on the map with red X's. He poured coffee, sat down without speaking, looked at what his father was creating. A battlefield map, territory to be cleared, enemies to be eliminated. "You sleep?" Thomas asked without looking up. "Not really. You?" "Marines learn to function without sleep." Thomas tapped the map. "I've been doing reconnaissance in my head. Every corner where they operate, every house where they might be. We're going to need to verify current locations, but this gives us a starting point." Raymond joined them at 06:43, then Christopher at 07:01. Nobody had slept well. They'd all spent the night thinking about what they'd agreed to, what it would mean, what it would cost, but nobody backed out. The Bishop family moved together, or not at all. "First thing," Thomas said, looking at his sons, "we need weapons. I have my old service pistol, a 1911 .45. It's functional, but I haven't fired it in years. We'll need to test it, make sure it's reliable. We'll need at least 3 more firearms, preferably untraceable." "I know someone," Marcus said quietly. "Guy I work with at the port. His cousin moves firearms. Not asking questions type of operation." Thomas nodded. "Make contact today. We need 2 handguns and a shotgun. Nothing fancy, nothing that stands out. Reliable weapons that won't jam. You got money for that?" "I got about 800 saved." "That should cover it. What about ammunition?" "That's included." "Good. Next, intelligence gathering. Raymond, you're our observer. You're studying criminal justice. You understand surveillance. I need you to track their patterns today and tomorrow. Where they post up, what time they start working, when they take breaks, where they sleep. Can you do that without being noticed? Raymond nodded. I can blend in. Nobody pays attention to college kids in this neighborhood. Christopher, you're with me. We're going to do a reconnaissance of every location on this map. We'll drive through, mark observations, identify entry and exit points. We'll look like a father and son running errands. Nobody's going to think twice about it. The planning continued for another hour. Thomas covered everything. Fields of fire, approach routes, contingency plans. If something went wrong, what to do if police showed up, how to dispose of evidence. His sons listened, taking notes, asking questions. It felt surreal. 24 hours ago, they'd been a normal family. Now they were planning multiple homicides with the precision of a military operation. At 0847, Marcus left to make contact with his source for weapons. Raymond grabbed a backpack and a notepad, headed out to begin surveillance. Thomas and Christopher climbed into Thomas's 1983 Ford LTD, started the systematic reconnaissance of West Baltimore's drug corners. While the Bishop family planned, 3 miles away, Ray Foster woke up in his girlfriend Keisha's apartment on Fulton Street. He rolled over, looked at the shadow box sitting on Keisha's dresser, Thomas Bishop's medals gleaming in the morning sunlight coming through the window. Ray had put it there last night, right next to Keisha's jewelry box and makeup, like it was a trophy. "Baby, why you got that old man's medals?" Keisha asked, applying eyeliner in the mirror. She was 23, worked at a hair salon on North Avenue, was trying to convince Ray to get out of the game before it killed him. Ran his crib last night, thought he had cash stashed. Came up empty, so we took what we could find. Ray lit a Newport, blew smoke at the ceiling. "Nigga's a veteran or whatever, got all these medals and shit." "That's fucked up, Ray. What'd an old veteran ever do to you?" "Lives on my block, acts like he's better than everybody. Walking around with his chest out, talking about honor and service. Like that shit matters on Pennsylvania Avenue in 1989. Ray stood up, walked to the dresser, picked up the Purple Heart. "This supposed to mean something. Supposed to represent sacrifice or whatever. But what it really represents is the same system that sent black men to Vietnam to die for a country that treats us like shit. Still fucked up to steal it. Everything in this city is fucked up, baby. I'm just surviving in it." Ray had no idea that survival had become impossible 12 hours ago when he violated Thomas Bishop's home. At 11:34, Marcus met his contact in a parking lot behind Mondawmin Mall. The transaction took 7 minutes. $400 for 2 revolvers, a .38 Special Smith & Wesson and a .357 Magnum Ruger, $200 for a Mossberg 500 12-gauge pump shotgun, barrel legally shortened to 18 inches, $100 for ammunition, 3 boxes for each handgun, 2 boxes of double-aught buckshot for the shotgun, everything wrapped in newspaper, placed in a gym bag, no questions asked, no names exchanged. Marcus drove straight home, stashed the bag in the basement. When Thomas and Christopher returned from reconnaissance at 15:47, they unpacked the weapons together at the kitchen table. Thomas field stripped each one, checked firing pins, cylinders, action. The .38 was well maintained. The .357 had some wear but functioned smoothly. The shotgun was nearly new. "This'll work," Thomas said. He loaded the .45, racked the slide, aimed at the wall, dry fired. The trigger pull was heavy but consistent. "We'll test fire everything tonight. Late, somewhere nobody's going to call police." Raymond returned at 18:23 with detailed notes. He'd tracked the West Side crew's movements for 9 hours, mapped their patterns with the thoroughness of a good student. Corner operations ran from 1100 to 0200, shifts changing every 4 hours. Ray showed up around 1400, stayed until 2100, Let his lieutenants handle night operations. K-Dog worked nights, 2100 to 400. Antoine and most of the younger runners worked rotating shifts. Living situations? Thomas asked. Raymond flipped pages. Ray sleeps at his girl's place on Fulton most nights, but sometimes crashes at his mom's in Cherry Hill. K-Dog definitely lives with his mom on Stricker. I confirmed that. Antoine shares that apartment on Lexington with 2 other guys. Darnell has a girlfriend who lives on Monroe. I think he stays there most of the time. Vehicle information? Ray drives the BMW, Maryland plates. Raymond read off the number. K-Dog has an old Buick Regal, blue, parked in front of his mom's house. Antoine doesn't have a car, walks everywhere or catches rides. Thomas took notes, added details to his map. The picture was forming. 10 targets, various locations, predictable patterns. The key was speed. Hit multiple locations quickly before word spread, before anyone could prepare or run. We start tomorrow night, Thomas said. Saturday, August 12th. Most of them will be working, distracted by money and customers. We'll have maybe 6 hours of darkness to work with, midnight to 6 a.m. We split into 2 teams, Marcus and Raymond. You take the first group. Christopher and I take the second. We hit them simultaneously at different locations, prevents them from warning each other. How do we coordinate without phones? Marcus asked. We don't. We synchronize watches, establish a timeline, stick to it. You hit your targets on schedule, we hit ours. We meet back here at 0600 Sunday morning. If something goes wrong, if police intervene, you abort and go home. Don't call, don't try to help, just get out. Understood? All 3 sons nodded. One more thing, Thomas said. The medals are probably at Ray's girlfriend's place. That's our primary objective. Everything else is about making sure nobody who knows about them survives to talk about it. We eliminate the witnesses. We recover the property. We do it quietly and professionally. At 23:47 hours, Thomas drove his 3 sons to an abandoned section of Gwynns Falls Park, an area where homeless camps and drug activity meant nobody would call police about gunshots. They spent an hour test-firing each weapon, loading and reloading, practicing trigger discipline and sight alignment. The .45 kicked harder than Thomas remembered, but it fired reliably. The .38 was smooth, easy to control. The .357 had substantial recoil, but devastating stopping power. The shotgun was exactly what it needed to be, room-clearing firepower. They burned through half their ammunition, getting familiar with the weapons, building muscle memory. Christopher had never fired a gun before. Thomas taught him the basics: stance, breathing, trigger squeeze, follow-through. By the end of the hour, Christopher could hit center mass on a target from 15 feet. Not expert level, but sufficient for what came next. They drove home through silent streets, Baltimore asleep, unaware that 36 rounds had just been fired in preparation for something the city hadn't seen since the riots of '68, Saturday, August 12, 1989. 6:32 hours. Thomas woke before his alarm, showered, dressed in dark clothes, black jeans, navy blue t-shirt, dark windbreaker, checked the .45, loaded, safety on, tucked into his waistband, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table looking at the photograph of Diane he kept there. She smiled out at him from 1985, healthy, beautiful, alive. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but they took the last thing I have that proves I stood for something. I can't let that go." His sons came down one by one. Nobody talked much. They were past the point of discussing it, past the point of backing out. They ate breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee. Normal Saturday morning except for the firearms on the kitchen counter. The tactical planning spread across the table, the weight of what was coming. At 1400, Raymond went out for final surveillance. Confirmed targets were where they should be. Ray at his corner on Pennsylvania and Fulton, K-Dog making rounds, collecting money, Antoine running packages, the West Side crew operating normally. No idea that tonight 10 of them would die. Thomas spent the afternoon teaching his sons close quarters combat, how to move through a house, how to clear corners, how to shoot from cover, how to maintain discipline under stress. They practiced in the narrow hallway upstairs, entry techniques, shooting positions, tactical movement. The row house became a training ground, every room a potential battlefield. At 1847, they stopped, ate dinner together, fried chicken, greens, cornbread. Diane's recipe. Nobody said much. The television played in the background, local news talking about the heat wave, about crime statistics, about a city struggling with crack and violence and the slow death of American industry. At 21:30, Thomas gathered them in the living room. Last chance to walk away. What we're about to do will change us forever. There's no coming back from this. You kill a man, that stays with you. You understand? All three nodded. Marcus, Raymond, your team won. Your targets are K-Dog, Darnell, Deshawn, and Malik. 4 locations, 4 eliminations. You start at Stricker Street, hit K-Dog's mother's house. He usually gets home around midnight. Then Darnell on Monroe, Deshawn on Carey, Malik wherever you find him. Questions? What if civilians are present? Raymond asked. No civilians. You wait for clear shots. If someone's mother or sister or girlfriend is there, you wait. We're not killing innocents. This is surgical, targeted. We're not animals. And if they resist? Marcus asked. Then you eliminate the threat and move to the next target. Thomas turned to Christopher. We're Team 2. Our targets are Ray, Antoine, Terrell, Brandon, Jamal, and Curtis. 6 locations. We start at Fulton Street, Ray's girlfriend's place. That's where the medals are. We recover them first, then we work down the list. At 23:42, Thomas synchronized his watch with his son's. We move at 001. Teams separate at 23:55. Marcus, Raymond, you take the LTD. Christopher and I will walk. Most of our targets are within 6 blocks. We maintain silence from this point forward. No talking unless necessary. We execute the mission and we come home. Marines never leave their brothers behind. We stick together. They loaded weapons, checked magazines, put on dark clothes and gloves. By 23:53, Marcus and Raymond walked out the front door, climbed into the LTD, drove away into Baltimore's summer night. Thomas and Christopher stood in the living room 2 minutes from starting something that couldn't be stopped. You ready? Thomas asked his youngest son. No, but I'm with you. That's all I need to hear. At 23:59, they walked out the door. The air was thick, oppressive, the kind of heat that makes everything feel harder. Streetlights cast orange pools on the pavement. Somewhere a dog barked. A car passed, bass thumping. Normal Saturday night in West Baltimore, except tonight 10 men would die. 01 hours, Sunday, August 13th, 1989. The hunt began. Marcus and Raymond pulled up to Stricker Street at 07. K-Dog's mother's house sat dark except for a porch light and the blue glow of a television in an upstairs window. K-Dog's blue Buick Regal was parked at the curb. They'd caught him at home. Same as we practiced, Marcus whispered. We wait for him to come out. No entry, no confrontation with his mother. We do this clean. They waited. At 034, the front door opened. K-Dog emerged, pulling on a jacket. 24 years old, had a daughter he saw on weekends, had been trying to save money to move his mother out of West Baltimore, had 4 more minutes to live. He walked to his car, never saw the 2 men approach from behind, never heard Marcus's footsteps, only realized something was wrong when he felt the barrel of the .38 press against the back of his head. Keys on the ground, Marcus said quietly. K-Dog froze. Man, you can have the car. I ain't strapped, just... This isn't about the car. Thursday night, you ran a house on Pennsylvania Avenue, took something that didn't belong to you. Understanding dawned. Bishop's crib. Man, that was Ray Ray's call. You were there. That's enough. The shot echoed down Stricker Street. K-Dog fell forward against his car, slid to the pavement. Marcus and Raymond were already moving, walking fast but not running, turning the corner before lights started coming on, before anyone looked out to see what the noise was. 1 down, 9 to go. At the same moment, 3 blocks away, Thomas and Christopher approached the apartment building on Fulton Street. Ray Foster's girlfriend, Keisha, lived on the 3rd floor, apartment 3C. The building was typical Baltimore. Brick, old, narrow stairwell, hallways that smelled like cooking and mildew. They climbed the stairs. Thomas moved with the muscle memory of 2 tours clearing villages, checking corners, listening for movement. At 3C, he knocked. Inside, television noise, footsteps. The door opened. Keisha stood there in a bathrobe, 23 years old, hair wrapped, holding a cup of tea. "Can I help?" She saw the gun in Thomas's hand, saw his face, understood immediately. "Where's Ray?" Thomas asked. "He ain't here." "Don't lie for him. Not tonight." "I'm not." Her voice shook. "I swear to God he left an hour ago. Said he had business, won't be back. Until late." Thomas looked past her into the apartment. Saw the television on, saw one person's worth of living. "The medals. Where are they?" Keisha's eyes went to the bedroom. "On the dresser." "Get them, now." She disappeared into the bedroom, returned with the shadow box. Thomas took it, looked at his Purple Heart, his bronze star, the photograph of his platoon, all there, intact. He didn't know what they meant, Keisha said. He thought he could take what wasn't his. Where is he now? "I don't know. I swear I don't know." Thomas believed her. "You never saw us, understand? You never saw who took these back." She nodded, crying now, understanding that something terrible was happening and she'd just narrowly avoided being part of it. Thomas and Christopher left her standing in her doorway, walked back down the stairs, medals recovered but primary targets still missing. By Oro 143, Marcus and Raymond had found Darnell Mitchell at his girlfriend's place on Monroe Street. He was counting money at her kitchen table when they kicked in the back door. He reached for a .380 pistol on the counter. Raymond shot him twice before his fingers touched it. At Era 0156, Deshaun Wallace was walking to his car outside his mother's house on Carey Street when Marcus stepped from between 2 parked vehicles. Deshaun tried to run, made it 20 feet before the .357 round caught him in the back, dropping him in the middle of the street. Malik Johnson proved harder to find. He moved between locations, no fixed address, paranoid about rival dealers and police alike. Marcus and Raymond spent 40 minutes driving through the neighborhood before finding him at an after-hours spot on Fremont Avenue. They waited outside until he emerged at 0241. He saw them, knew immediately what it meant, tried to pull a knife. Marcus put 3 rounds center mass. The .38 spoke quietly. Malik fell in an alley that had seen too much death to remember one more body. 4 down, 6 to go. Thomas and Christopher found Antoine Harris at his apartment on Lexington at 0217. The building's front door was unlocked. Broken lock nobody had bothered to fix. They climbed to the 2nd floor. Apartment 2B. Thomas knocked. "Who is it?" Antoine's voice muffled through the door. "Maintenance, got a water leak reported from your unit." The door opened. Antoine stood there in basketball shorts and no shirt. 19 years old, Ray's cousin had dropped out of Baltimore City Community College to run drugs full-time because the money was better and faster than any legitimate path he could see. He saw Thomas, saw the gun, tried to slam the door. Thomas's boot stopped it. The .45 came up. Antoine backed into his living room, hands raised. Mr. Bishop, please. I was just following Ray Ray. That's his operation. You were there. You put hands on my property. You laughed about it. I didn't know, those medals and shit. I didn't know what they meant to you. They mean I bled for this country. They mean I served honorably. They mean something in a world where nothing else seems to matter anymore. Antoine kept backing up. Please, I got a mother. I got a little sister. I'm trying to help them. By stealing? By destroying other people's homes? Thomas shook his head. You made choices, young brother. Now you live with them, or don't. The shot silenced Antoine's pleas. Thomas and Christopher left him on his apartment floor, blood spreading across cheap linoleum, 19 years old and done. At 0309, they found Terrell Brown at his grandmother's house on Pressman Street. Terrell had just gotten home from his shift on the corner, counting the night's take, maybe $2,000 in crumpled bills. His grandmother was asleep upstairs. Thomas waited in the living room until Terrell came in through the back door. Don't wake your grandmother, Thomas said quietly. Come with me. Outside. Terrell looked at the gun, looked at Thomas's face, calculated his odds, and decided cooperation might save his life. They walked out to the small backyard, enclosed by a privacy fence, invisible from the street. Thursday night, Thomas said. You were there. Man, I didn't even go inside. I was the lookout. I just sat in the car. So you're an accomplice. Still makes you guilty. I'm 20 years old. I'm trying to take care of my grandmother. She raised me after my mom died. I'm all she got left. Thomas thought about Diane, about promises to protect family, about the terrible mathematics of who lives and who dies. Your grandmother's going to wake up tomorrow and find you gone. She's going to spend the rest of her life wondering what happened. You understand that? Terrell nodded, tears running down his face. Yes, sir. You want to tell me anything? Where Ray Ray might be? He doesn't tell us that kind of shit. He moves around. Could be anywhere. Thomas nodded, raised the .45. Terrell closed his eyes. The shot was quiet in the enclosed yard. His grandmother slept through it. By the time she woke at 6:30 and found him, Thomas Bishop would be long gone. Brandon Lewis was different. He lived on Pennsylvania Avenue, 4 blocks from Thomas's own house. Was 19, newest member of the West Side crew, still lived with his parents. His mother, Dorothy Lewis, had brought Thomas a casserole when Diane died, had told him she was praying for his family. At 0341, Thomas stood across the street from the Lewis house, Christopher beside him. Lights were off. Brandon's mother and father were sleeping, completely unaware that their son had participated in a home invasion 2 nights ago. We can skip this one, Christopher said quietly. Move on. He's just a kid, Dad. Thomas looked at the house. Thought about Dorothy Lewis's casserole. Thought about innocent people caught in crossfire they didn't deserve. Thought about the code. Eliminate all witnesses. Leave no one to talk about the medals or where they ended up. No, he said finally. We finish what we started. They waited until 0417 when Brandon emerged from the house, moving quiet so he wouldn't wake his parents, heading out to meet someone. They took him 2 blocks away in an empty lot where abandoned cars rusted under Baltimore's smoggy sky. It was quick, professional. Brandon never saw it coming. 1 round from the .45. The sound echoed off brick row houses. A dog started barking. Thomas and Christopher walked away. 2 more names crossed off an invisible list. By 0500, dawn was approaching. The sky had that quality, that subtle shift from absolute black to the faintest suggestion of gray. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed from someone's illegal backyard coop. Church bells would ring in 3 hours. People would wake to Sunday morning, to coffee and newspapers, to normal life. But 8 families would wake to horror. Marcus and Raymond had returned to the house at 0447. 4 targets eliminated, missions completed, no complications. They sat at the kitchen table, weapons disassembled, cleaning them methodically, saying nothing. The weight of what they'd done settling over them like a physical thing. Thomas and Christopher arrived at 0512, 7 targets down. 3 remained: Ray Foster, Jamal Robinson, Curtis Green. The primary target had escaped, but there was still time. Ray, Marcus asked. Wasn't at his girlfriend's place. She didn't know where he went. We can find him. I know where he goes sometimes, late-night spots, after-hours clubs. Thomas shook his head. We're done for tonight. We've been operational for 5 hours. Any longer and we're making mistakes, leaving evidence, getting sloppy. We recover tomorrow night. Finish the list. At 0623, Evelyn Mitchell woke in her row house on Monroe Street. Made coffee like she did every Sunday morning, got ready for church. Her daughter would be picking her up at 0900. She'd spend the day with family, have Sunday dinner. Thank God for her blessings. At 0647, she called her son Darnell to remind him about church. The phone rang and rang and rang. No answer. That was strange. Darnell always answered on Sunday mornings. She called again. Nothing. At 0721, worried now, she called her daughter. Drive by Darnell's girlfriend's place. Something doesn't feel right. The daughter called police at 0804, hysterical. My brother, there's so much blood. He's dead. By 0900, Baltimore Police Department had discovered 4 bodies: Kevin Thompson on Stricker Street, Deshaun Wallace on Carey, Malik Johnson in an alley on Fremont, Darnell Mitchell at his girlfriend's house on Monroe. By 1100, they'd found 3 more: Antoine Harris in his apartment on Lexington, Terrell Brown in his grandmother's backyard, Brandon Lewis in an empty lot off Pennsylvania Avenue. By 1400, the pattern was clear. All members of the West Side crew, all shot execution style, all killed within a 6-hour window. 7 dead in one night across West Baltimore. Lieutenant James Morrison, Baltimore Police Department homicide, stood in the command center at the Western District Station, looking at a map covered in red pins. 7 locations, 7 bodies, military precision. This wasn't gang violence, he said to Detective William Carter. Gang violence is chaotic, drive-bys, spray and pray, collateral damage. This was surgical. Someone hunted these boys down one by one. Retaliation, Carter asked. Has to be. Question is, retaliation for what? The answer came at 1647 when Ray Foster walked into the Western District Station, Keisha beside him, both of them looking terrified. I know who did it, Ray said. I know who killed my crew. Sunday, August 13th, 1989, 16:47 hours. Ray Foster sat in interview room 2 at the Western District Station, Keisha beside him, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Lieutenant James Morrison sat across from them, recorder running, Detective William Carter taking notes. Tell me what happened, Morrison said. Ray looked at his hands. 26 years old, shot caller for a drug crew that no longer existed, alive only because he'd left his girlfriend's apartment before the Bishop family came looking for him. Thursday night, August 10th, we ran a house, 2347 Pennsylvania Avenue, looking for money. We'd heard the old man who lived there had cash stashed. We didn't find shit, so we trashed the place, took his medals off the wall, military shit from Vietnam. Who's we? Me, K-Dog, Antoine, Brandon. 4 of us went inside. Terrell stayed in the car as lookout. Morrison wrote names, all dead now except Ray. Continue. That's it. We left. I took the medals back to Keisha's place. Put them on her dresser like a fucking trophy. His voice cracked, like it meant something. What happened last night? I left Keisha's around 11. Had business to handle. Wasn't going to be back until late. When I got back this morning, she told me someone came for the medals. Older black man, had his son with him, armed. She gave them the medals and they left. Description, Keisha spoke up. Tall, maybe 6'1", gray hair, military fade, scar on his left hand. Moved like, I don't know how to describe it, like a soldier. His son was younger, maybe 18, 20. They didn't say much. Just took the medals and left. Morrison pulled out a photo lineup. 6 photographs of black men in their 40s, Thomas Bishop among them. This him? Keisha pointed immediately. That's him, Thomas Bishop. Lives on Pennsylvania Avenue, couple blocks from where we hit. You know him? Everybody knows him. Vietnam vet, works at Hopkins. Raised 3 sons alone after his wife died. Good man, keeps to himself, doesn't fuck with the drug trade. Ray stopped. Didn't fuck with the drug trade until we violated his house. Morrison stood up. Wait here. In the hallway, he pulled Carter aside. Thomas Bishop, check him out. I want military records, current address, family, information, known associates, and find out where he was last night. Carter pulled the file 20 minutes later. Thomas Anthony Bishop, born March 15, 1942. 2 tours in Vietnam, 1967-1969. United States Marine Corps. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart. Honorable discharge. No criminal record, not even a traffic ticket. Current address, 2347 Pennsylvania Avenue. 3 sons. Marcus Anthony, 22. Raymond Thomas, 20. Christopher James, 18. Exemplary record, Carter said. Model citizen. Works maintenance at Johns Hopkins, 15 years, excellent evaluations. Neighbors describe him as quiet, respectful, keeps his sons out of trouble. Until we stole his medals and he turned into a one-man death squad. Morrison looked at the map on the wall, 7 red pins marking 7 bodies. How many shooters, based on ballistics? Minimum 4. We recovered shell casings from 3 different calibers. 45 automatic, 38 special, .357 Magnum, different firing pins, different weapons, multiple shooters working coordinated hits. So Bishop and his 3 sons, the whole family. Morrison pulled the tactical team roster. At 1834, 8 officers assembled in the briefing room, body armor, weapons, prepared for the worst. This wasn't arresting a drug dealer or serving a warrant on a domestic abuser. This was approaching a combat veteran and his 3 sons, all armed, all having demonstrated willingness to use lethal force. Expect resistance, Morrison told his team. Bishop served 2 tours in Vietnam. He's trained, disciplined, and he's already killed 7 people in 6 hours. His sons are with him. We go in ready for a firefight. At 1912, 3 unmarked cars and 2 patrol units approached Pennsylvania Avenue. The sun was setting, temperature still in the low 90s, humidity making everything feel like breathing through a wet towel. The block was quiet, Sunday evening, people inside having dinner or getting ready for the work week. Nobody noticed the police presence until vehicles stopped in front of 2347 Pennsylvania Avenue. Thomas Bishop sat on his front porch, unarmed, hands visible on his knees. Marcus, Raymond, and Christopher stood behind him, also unarmed, also calm. The shadow box with the medals sat on the porch railing, Purple Heart gleaming in the dying sunlight. Morrison approached slowly, hand near his sidearm but not drawing it. The other officers fanned out, covering angles, watching windows and doors. Thomas Bishop, Lieutenant. Thomas's voice was calm, steady. I expect you're here about this weekend. You know why we're here? I do. Thomas stood slowly, movements deliberate, non-threatening. We're not going to make this difficult. We did what needed doing. Now we'll accept what comes next. Morrison had prepared for a standoff, for barricaded suspects, for tear gas and negotiators and SWAT. What he got was a Marine sergeant surrendering with the same discipline he'd brought to combat. Marcus Bishop, Raymond Bishop, Christopher Bishop, Thomas Bishop, you're all under arrest for 7 counts of first-degree murder, Turn around, hands behind your backs." They complied without resistance. Marcus first, then Raymond, then Christopher. Thomas last, watching his sons get cuffed before accepting the handcuffs himself. As Morrison snapped the cuffs on Thomas's wrists, he couldn't help but ask the question eating at him. Was it worth it? 7 lives for some medals. Thomas looked at the shadow box on the porch railing. It wasn't about the medals, Lieutenant. It was about respect, about a man standing for something when everything else has been taken away. They violated my home, stole proof that I served honorably, laughed about it. In this neighborhood, in this city, if you don't respond to that kind of disrespect, you become prey. That's not justice, that's murder. In West Baltimore in 1989, sometimes they're the same thing. They loaded the 4 Bishop men into separate vehicles. Neighbors had started gathering, watching, whispering. Some knew what had happened, had heard about the bodies, had pieced together the connection. Others just saw a good man being arrested, a family destroyed, and wondered what had finally broken Thomas Bishop. Dorothy Lewis stood on her porch 3 blocks away, watching the police cars drive past. She didn't know yet that her son Brandon was dead, wouldn't find out until detectives knocked on her door at 2047. But she felt something in her chest, something cold and terrible, watching Thomas Bishop in the back of that patrol car. As the convoy pulled away from Pennsylvania Avenue, Thomas looked back at his house, the house he'd bought with Diane in 1972, the house where he'd raised 3 sons, the house he'd defended 2 nights ago with everything he had. He'd never see it again as a free man. At the Western District Station, they separated the Bishops into different interview rooms. Morrison took Thomas personally. The recorder clicked on at 2034. "You want a lawyer?" "No point. I'm not denying anything." "Walk me through it, Thursday night to now." Thomas did. He laid out the home invasion, the stolen medals, the decision to respond, the planning, the execution. He spoke calmly, methodically, like he was debriefing after a military operation. Described each target, each location, each shot. No emotion, no justification beyond the simple statement, "They took what was mine. I took it back." "You murdered 7 people. I eliminated 7 threats to my family's honor and safety. In the Corps, that's called a successful operation." "This isn't Vietnam. This is Baltimore. There are laws." Thomas looked at Morrison with eyes that had seen too much in too many places for too many years. Where were those laws Thursday night? Where was law enforcement when 4 men kicked in my door and destroyed my home? I called 911. Officers came, took a report, and left. No investigation, no follow-up, no justice, so I made my own. That's vigilantism. That's survival in a city that's given up on neighborhoods like mine. Morrison turned off the recorder, leaned back in his chair. "Off the record, I understand why you did it. Hell, part of me even agrees with you. They violated your home, stole from a veteran, showed no respect. But on the record as a police officer, I have to tell you that you and your sons are going away for life. You understand that?" "I do." "Was it worth it?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Ask me in 20 years. By Monday morning, August 14th, the news had exploded across Baltimore. 7 dead, the Bishop family responsible, military-style execution, Vietnam veterans' revenge. Channel 11 set up outside the Western District Station. The Baltimore Sun ran the headline, "West Side Massacre, Veteran and Sons Charged in 7 Murders." In the neighborhood, reactions split down the middle. Some said Thomas Bishop was a monster who'd murdered young men in cold blood, regardless of what they'd done. Others said he was a desperate father defending his family in a city where the law had abandoned them. At Mount Pleasant Baptist Church on Pennsylvania Avenue, where the Bishop family had attended services for 17 years, Reverend Calvin Thompson struggled through his sermon. We ask why. Why this violence? Why couldn't neighbors resolve their differences without bloodshed? Why does a stolen medal matter more than 7 human lives? He had no answers, just grief and the terrible knowledge that his congregation included families on both sides, people who knew Thomas Bishop as a good man driven to extremes, and people who'd lost sons to his vengeance. The victims' families demanded justice. Evelyn Mitchell, Darnell's mother, stood outside the courthouse and spoke to reporters through tears. "My son had a daughter 2 years old. Thomas Bishop took her father over what? Pride. Military medals that probably ain't worth $100. That's not justice. That's murder." But quietly, privately, more than a few people in West Baltimore admitted they understood. When Jerome Washington, who ran a barber shop on North Avenue and had known Thomas for 20 years, spoke to a Sun reporter, he was careful with his words. "I ain't saying Thomas was right, but I understand it. When you get violated in your own home, when the police won't help, when you're a man who served this country and some young boys treat you like you're nothing, I understand why he snapped. Don't make it right, but I understand it." The trial of Thomas Anthony Bishop and his 3 sons began in February of 1990 in a Baltimore City courthouse downtown. The venue couldn't be changed. There was nowhere in Maryland that hadn't heard about the West Side Massacre. 28 combined charges of first-degree murder, 7 dead, 4 defendants, systematic execution. The prosecution had Ray Foster's testimony, forensic evidence linking the weapons to the Bishop family, shell casings recovered from 7 different crime scenes, and a timeline so detailed it left no room for reasonable doubt. Most damning of all, they had Thomas's confession, recorded, transcribed, delivered in the calm voice of a man who felt no remorse. The defense, 4 public defenders who looked overwhelmed from day one, attempted to argue temporary insanity brought on by extreme emotional disturbance. They painted a picture of a good man driven to madness by the violation of his home, the theft of irreplaceable military honors, and the cumulative trauma of losing his wife, watching his city collapse and being abandoned by the legal system that should have protected him. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about PTSD from Vietnam, about the significance of military medals to combat veterans, about how the home invasion could have triggered a psychotic break. They called neighbors who testified about Thomas's character, 20 years of being a good father, a good neighbor, a man who helped elderly women with their groceries and shoveled snow from sidewalks, and volunteered at the church. The prosecution destroyed that argument in under 3 hours. Temporary insanity doesn't involve 48 hours of planning, Assistant State's Attorney Jennifer Walsh told the jury. Doesn't involve acquiring untraceable weapons, conducting surveillance, coordinating a multi-team operation across 7 locations. This wasn't a psychotic break. This was premeditated revenge, executed with military precision by a trained killer who decided the law didn't apply to him. She walked them through each murder. Kevin Thompson, 24, shot in the back of the head outside his mother's house. Darnell Mitchell, 22, shot at his girlfriend's kitchen table while counting money. Deshaun Wallace, 21, shot in the back while trying to run. Malik Johnson, 23, shot in an alley. Antoine Harris, 19, shot in his apartment while begging for his life. Terrell Brown, 20, shot in his grandmother's backyard. Brandon Lewis, 19, shot in an empty lot, his mother's casserole sitting forgotten on Thomas Bishop's kitchen counter. These weren't enemy combatants, Walsh said, her voice rising. These were American citizens, young men, yes. Men who made poor choices, yes. But men with families, with futures, with the same constitutional rights to life that Thomas Bishop enjoyed. And he executed them like it was Da Nang in 1968. The jury, 12 Baltimore residents who understood street life but hadn't lived the specific pressures of West Baltimore in 1989, deliberated for 23 hours over 4 days. Guilty, all charges, all 4 defendants. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed, families of the victims on one side, supporters of the bishops on the other, separated by an aisle that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. Thomas Anthony Bishop, 7 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Marcus Bishop, 7 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Raymond Bishop, 5 life sentences, 2 concurrent, possibility of parole after 40 years. Christopher Bishop, 5 life sentences, 2 concurrent, possibility of parole after 35 years, given his age at the time of the crimes. When Judge Harold Richardson read the sentences, Thomas Bishop showed no emotion, no tears, no shock, just that same military bearing he'd carried since 1965. The only thing he asked for was 60 seconds to speak to his sons before they were separated. The request was granted. In a holding cell beneath the courthouse, Thomas Bishop stood with Marcus, Raymond, and Christopher for the last time as free men touching distance from each other. "I'm proud of you," Thomas said. "All of you. You stood with your family when it mattered. You protected our honor. Your mother would be proud too." "Dad!" Christopher's voice broke. He was 19 now, would be 54 before he had any chance of freedom. "No regrets, son. We did what Marines do. We accomplished the mission. Now we serve our time with the same discipline we brought to the operation." They separated the bishops that day, sent them to different facilities to prevent them from coordinating anything inside. Thomas went to Maryland Correctional Institution in Hagerstown, Marcus to Eastern Correctional Institution in Westover, Raymond to North Branch Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Christopher to Roxbury Correctional Institution, the youngest inmate in a facility full of men who'd given up on ever leaving. Thomas Anthony Bishop served 23 years in Hagerstown. During that time, he became a model prisoner, never wrote up for disciplinary issues, worked in the prison library, taught other inmates to read, ran a veterans support group for the handful of other Vietnam vets serving time. Guards said he was one of the most disciplined men they'd ever supervised. The military training never left him. He wrote letters to the victims' families every year on August 13th. Most went unanswered. A few came back unopened. But Evelyn Mitchell, Darnell's mother, wrote back once in 2001, "Your apologies don't bring my son back. Your explanations don't change what you did. But I forgive you anyway because carrying hate for 12 years has already cost me too much. My blood pressure, my health, my peace. I forgive you so I can have some life left before I die." Thomas kept that letter in his cell until the day he died. On November 3, 2012, at 6:42 a.m., Thomas Anthony Bishop suffered a massive stroke during morning count. He was taken to the prison infirmary, where he died at 8:17 a.m., 70 years old. The chaplain on duty reported that Thomas's last coherent words were, "Tell my boys I did what I had to do. Tell Diane I protected what was ours." He was buried at Loudon Park Cemetery next to Diane. The headstone reads, "Thomas Anthony Bishop, 1942-2012. Beloved husband and father, USMC Semper Fi." Marcus Bishop remains incarcerated at Eastern Correctional Institution. He's 57 now. Parole has been denied in 2000, 2010, and 2020. He earned his bachelor's degree through correspondence courses, works as a peer counselor helping younger inmates adjust to long-term incarceration. In a 2019 interview with a University of Maryland criminology student, Marcus said, "My father taught us that family comes first, that honor matters, that some disrespect can't be tolerated. We followed that code. 7 men died because of it. I've had 30 years to think about whether it was worth it. Some days I think yes. Some days I think we destroyed more than we protected. Most days I just don't know." Raymond Bishop was paroled in 2019 after 29 years. He's 50 now, lives in a halfway house in Baltimore County, works at a community center helping at-risk youth stay away from gangs and violence. He doesn't talk much about what happened. When pressed by a Baltimore Sun reporter on the 30th anniversary of the massacre, he said only, "I was 20 years old, thought I was protecting my family's honor. Now I'm 50 and I still see their faces every night." Antoine Harris begging in his apartment. Terrell Brown crying in his grandmother's yard. You don't forget that. You just learn to live with it. Christopher Bishop was paroled in 2016 after 27 years. He's 49 now, changed his name legally to Christopher Washington, his grandmother's maiden name, and moved to Philadelphia. Works as a substance abuse counselor, helps young men in West Philadelphia avoid the paths that destroyed his family. He's married, has 2 daughters. He's never told about what their father did. Maybe someday. Not yet. The victims' families carried their own weight. Evelyn Mitchell, Darnell's mother, raised her granddaughter alone after Darnell's girlfriend proved unable to cope with single motherhood. She died in 2015 at 73, heart failure according to the death certificate. But people who knew her said it was a broken heart that finally gave out after 26 years of grief. Dorothy Lewis, Brandon's mother, sold her house on Pennsylvania Avenue in 1991. Couldn't walk past the empty lot where they'd found her son. Moved to Baltimore County, lived quietly until her death in 2018 at 84. She never spoke about the massacre. When reporters found her on anniversaries, she'd close the door without a word. Kevin Thompson's daughter, now 41, works as a social worker in Baltimore, helping families affected by violence. She knows what happened to her father, knows that Thomas Bishop killed him over stolen medals. She doesn't talk about it publicly, but colleagues say she's dedicated her life to breaking cycles of violence that destroyed her childhood. Ray Foster kept his word. He testified at trial, his testimony helping secure convictions. Then he disappeared. Left Baltimore in 1991, moved to Atlanta, started a legitimate auto repair business, changed his life completely. He's 61 now, remarried, has 4 children, including a daughter who's a teacher. He never came back to Baltimore. When contacted by a documentary filmmaker in 2019, he declined to participate but sent a written statement. What happened in August 1989 destroyed 2 families, ours and theirs. We violated Thomas Bishop's home thinking it didn't matter, thinking we could do what we wanted because we ran those streets. He taught us different. 7 of my crew paid with their lives. Thomas Bishop and his sons paid with their freedom. Nobody won. Everybody lost. That's the only truth worth remembering. West Baltimore changed after that August weekend, but not in the ways people hoped. For a few years, there was increased awareness about the consequences of home invasions, about respecting veterans, about not pushing desperate men too far. Community organizations held meetings. Churches organized peace rallies. Police increased patrols. But the change wasn't permanent. Within 5 years, new crews had formed. New territorial disputes arose. New violence erupted. The crack epidemic peaked in the early 90s, bringing even worse bloodshed. The economic devastation that had created the conditions for the West Side Massacre never improved. Human nature being what it is, the lessons faded. Lieutenant James Morrison retired from Baltimore Police in 2009 after 37 years. In a 2020 podcast interview about the case, he said, "The Bishop case haunts me because there are no good guys. Thomas Bishop was legally a mass murderer who deserved every day of his life sentence. But morally, he was a desperate father in a broken city where the system had completely failed. We took his report about the home invasion and did nothing. No investigation, no follow-up, no justice. So he made his own. I can condemn what he did while understanding why he did it. Both things are true. That contradiction is something I'll carry to my grave. The house at 2347 Pennsylvania Avenue was foreclosed in 1991. It sold to a new family in 1993. Young couple with 2 kids, no knowledge of its history. They repainted the living room where the shadow box used to hang, turned it into a nursery, raised their children there. When they found out years later what had happened, they were horrified. But they'd already made a home there. Sometimes ignorance is a mercy. The West Side Cruise corners on Pennsylvania Avenue and Fulton Street changed hands a dozen times in the decades after 1989. New dealers, new crews, new territorial disputes. The city just moved on. Life continued as it always does, covering scars with layers of normalcy until they almost disappear. Almost. The story of Thomas Bishop became a legend in West Baltimore, told and retold until fact and fiction blurred together. Some versions made him a hero who stood up for himself when nobody else would. Others made him a monster who killed children over pride. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either version allowed. Was Thomas Bishop a murderer? Yes. He killed 7 people with premeditation and planning, hunted them across West Baltimore over 6 hours, showed no mercy to young men who begged for their lives. Was he a desperate father driven to extremes by circumstances beyond his control? Also, yes. The uncomfortable truth is both things can be true simultaneously. And that's the most disturbing part of this story because it forces us to ask questions we'd rather avoid. What would we do if someone violated our home, stole our most precious possessions, and the legal system offered no remedy? How far would we go to protect our family's honor in a world where honor seems to matter less every day? Does justice exist when police won't respond to property crimes in certain neighborhoods? Is there a line between righteous anger and unforgivable violence, or does extreme pressure erase that line entirely? Thomas Bishop crossed a boundary no human being should cross. But that boundary existed in a world where law enforcement had essentially surrendered entire neighborhoods, where economic opportunity had evaporated, leaving only the drug trade, where respect was the only currency that mattered because everything else had been taken away, where an honest father facing humiliation had nowhere to turn except to violence. There's no easy answer, no clear moral, no satisfying conclusion where good triumphs and evil is punished. Just a simple and terrible truth. Violence breeds violence. Broken systems create their own monsters. And sometimes the line between justice and vengeance becomes so thin it disappears entirely, leaving only blood and questions and families destroyed on both sides. 35 years have passed since that August night in West Baltimore. The city hasn't healed. It's evolved, adapted, found new ways to struggle. Every year, families face impossible choices when systems fail them. Every year, some choose violence. The Purple Heart sits in a safety deposit box now, held by Raymond Bishop after his parole. He's never displayed it, never worn it, never even looked at it since the day he was arrested. It represents too much: his father's service, his father's honor, his father's rage, and 7 lives ended to protect a piece of metal worth maybe $50. Revenge doesn't bring back what was stolen. It doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't restore lost dignity. It only creates new wounds, new dead, new families learning to live with emptiness where love used to be. Thomas Bishop defended his family's honor but lost his soul. He eliminated 7 threats but created 7 shattered families. He won a battle for respect but lost the war against his own humanity. And in the end, he died in a prison infirmary, 70 years old, surrounded by corrections officers instead of the sons he tried to protect. Only one question remains. One each of us must answer for ourselves. When the system fails, when no one helps, when respect is all you have left, how far would you go? Where do you draw the line? And once you cross it, can you ever come back? If this story made you think about justice, revenge, and the price we pay for protecting those we love, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that challenge what we think we know about right and wrong, about law and morality, about how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary darkness when pushed to the edge. Comment below. What would you have done in Thomas Bishop's position? Where do you draw the line between justice and vengeance? Because these stories aren't just from the past. They're happening right now, somewhere, in forgotten neighborhoods where the system has failed and desperation takes hold. The names change, the cities change, but the fundamental question remains: what transforms a decent father into something else entirely? And are we all just one violation, one humiliation, one desperate moment away from crossing lines we never thought we'd cross? Until next time, remember, the monsters we fear aren't always born that way. Sometimes they're made. One stolen medal, one violated home, one night when honor demands blood and the only justice available comes from a .45 automatic carried by a man who decided that respect mattered more than mercy.